All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. Today we'll be briefly discussing a new medication for the treatment of chronic hepatitis C, or HCV. The treatment is presently known as 2D, though the brand name will likely change. The components of this medication are Paritaprevir with Ritonavir, as well as Ombitasvir and ribavirin, and again, it is for genotype 4 of HCV. This webinar is being provided by CTAC, known as the Canadian Treatment Action Council. My name is Adam Cook. I'm a policy researcher with CTAC. We are Canada's national civil society organization addressing access to treatment, care, and support for people living with HIV and hepatitis C. And we're reaching out to you today to inform about this new medication and get your feedback. I'd like to remind you that the webinar is being recorded and will be posted online. The question session at the end will not be included in that video. A bit about our agenda today. Today we're going to speak a bit about the regulatory process for reviewing drugs in Canada. We'll look at some of the key attributes of 2D. We'll evaluate some of the clinical trial data. And finally, I will ask you to please complete a survey about your thoughts on the drug. This survey data will be used to complete a report for the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health, though your contribution will be anonymous in that report. Now, we're conducting this webinar because this new medication is now under review by the Common Drug Review, or the CDR. Now, the CDR is the review body that makes a recommendation as to whether or not a drug should be listed on public insurance plans. Now, as part of the review process, the CDR solicits opinions from Canadians about the drugs they review. Now, that's what we're doing here. We'll let you know about the drug, we'll ask you to complete a survey, and based on that survey data, we'll let the CDR know what you think. CTAC does this regularly for every HIV and HCV med under review. We interact with the CDR very, very regularly. Normally we have a standalone CDR video that I would play at this point. You can see in the chat window, that link is there for you now. There's a bit of a format issue, so we won't be playing it in the presentation today, but I'll also send that link out to you after the presentation. It's a great little tool to get acquainted with the CDR process and how it works. But just to go over it a little quickly with you, basically what happens is the Health Canada has a division called the Therapeutic Products Directorate that functions very much like the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA. It decides whether or not the drug is effective and safe. Once they say yes, then the drug is available on the market. But actually getting the drug accessible on our public insurance plans involves another step, which is the Common Drug Review. The Common Drug Review reviews whether or not the drug has any social value. Does it deliver better health outcomes for less price, or does it cost more and still deliver better health outcomes? Basically, the CDR reviews the drug and decides how much better health outcomes are worth how much money, and should we recommend that the public formularies list this for each province. So the CDR will decide that for 2D, and when they make that decision, they will have done so with the report that we will write after this presentation based on your feedback. So again, I can't overemphasize this enough. Your participation and your feedback is so important to this process, and we really sincerely appreciate it. So today we're reviewing 2D, an HCV medication manufactured by AbbVie. Again, its components are Paritaprevir, which is an NS3-4A protease inhibitor. Paritaprevir is boosted by Ritonavir in this medication. So in this case, Ritonavir keeps the drug active in the body longer. Also included in this treatment is Ombitasvir, which is an NS5A inhibitor. And finally, while we are getting out of the interferon era, we're still not quite done with ribavirin. So with this medication, ribavirin is still a factor. Now, when talking about viral actions and inhibitors, like a protease inhibitor or an NS5A inhibitor, we're just meaning that this medication is targeting specific viral processes and sites. And that's how this new class of drugs, the direct-acting antivirals, work. We're really excited about DAAs because they are replacing interferon. They are way more effective, but they are so by attacking specific viral processes at specific sites. Here we see again the chemical composition of this treatment. Now, it's worth noting that this drug is very, very similar to AbbVie's medication Holkirapac. I'm sure you've heard of it. CTAC reviewed this one in another webinar earlier. It's 3D and 2D are pretty similar. 2D contains, in fact, the same drugs as Holkirapac except Decabavir. So it's also worth noting that Holkirapac has been reviewed and tested in over 2,700 patients to date. So Holkirapac has an extremely good safety profile. 2D is made up of most of what is in Holkirapac, and it too has an extremely good safety profile as a result. So since I've mentioned Holkirapac, let's talk briefly about the differences. You can see here that the two treatments are the same except for the drug Decabavir, which is in Holkirapac but is not in 2D. Now this is because Decabavir is only effective against genotype 1, and 2D is for genotype 4. But what's great about the similarities here is that we can be fairly confident to a degree that the safety profile of 2D should be close or similar to that of Holkirapac, which again had an excellent safety profile. In fact, the submission of 2D is largely because of its new indication as being for the treatment of genotype 4. So it can be considered informally as something of a Holkirapac but for genotype 4. Certainly paraphrasing there. Holkirapac itself is approved by Health Canada and the CDR, and now we're going through that process for 2D. So hopefully that clarifies a bit the similarities and the differences between these two drugs. Of course, they're manufactured by the same manufacturer as well. So let's talk about the unique indication for 2D. Many of you may be aware, but not all hepatitis C infections are the same. In fact, the viral infection can present differently at the genetic level. This means that the viruses themselves can be a little different, and how we treat you may depend on the type of virus you've been infected with. In North America, we mostly see genotype 1. So in fact, in Canada, only about 2% of our HCV infections are genotype 4. However, in other parts of the world, genotype 4 is a really big problem. It's very prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa, it's very prevalent in the Middle East, and in Egypt specifically, it accounts for at least 90% of all HCV infections in that country. Furthermore, we're starting to see genotype 4 in many European countries, so it's good to see a medication that is taking on this genotype. Here's a helpful diagram that should help you to visualize the prevalence of genotypes across the globe. So in this case, the yellow wedges represent genotype 4. You can see there's little more than a very tiny sliver of yellow in North America, but in Africa it's a real problem, specifically Northeast and Central Africa. Again, you can see that it's also becoming more common in Europe. North America, by contrast, you'll see is mostly large red wedges, indicating that our problem is mostly related to genotype 1. Important to note, however, that many of us work with newcomer and immigrant populations, and Canada enjoys welcoming newcomers from several endemic countries. So knowing your genotypes and how to treat them is still a very important skill for those of us working in HCV. It's very important to be aware of. So as I've said, 2D is now under review by the CDR, and their submission is largely based on the results of the PEARL-1 study, which was also used to support Holkirapac. Again, recall how similar these two drugs are. But there is some interesting work being done in the AGATE trials, so we're going to briefly look at those, even though the results are not in. Those trials specifically are still in progress. Now, I'm sure you all know a major goal in HCV treatment is to eliminate interferon entirely from new regimens, and indeed get it off the menu entirely. We're there. It looks like we're in that interferon-free era now. Most new meds do not involve interferon at all. This is fantastic news, and 2D is representative of the kind of work being done to get away from interferon. So with that in mind, and as we'll discuss further, we're still managing the space for ribavirin in HCV treatment. So we're still not quite away from ribavirin entirely yet, but interferon, we're looking good. So let's look at PEARL-1. This was a study concluded just this past February. It builds upon other PEARL studies showing the efficacy and safety of Holkirapac while testing efficacy against other genotypes. So this trial specifically, the phase 2B portion of PEARL-1, tests 2D specifically in non-cirrhotic patients who have HCV genotypes 1b or 4, which is what we're anticipating 2D's efficacy to be. The trial is based on a 12-week course of treatment with a 48-week follow-up, and SVR12 is the goal here. So again, for those of you who are not familiar, SVR means a sustained virologic response, which is the term we use to mean an effective cure. The viral response has been sustained long enough that we are now confident the virus is clear and the patient is cured. SVR12, meaning 12 weeks, is the contemporary landmark right now, but I've noted here that this trial is also looking at SVR4. This means they're checking the viral response at 4 weeks. This does not mean that we have a 4-week cure yet, but it's exciting to see that trials are still evaluating just how early we start to see that viral response. So for those of you who monitor clinical trial data, you'll start to see more and more often SVR4 numbers. Again, we're hoping to get there one day. These drugs are extremely strong. Everyone's evaluating SVR to a degree, 4 to a degree. It logically leads us to consider that one day we'll get to SVR4 medications, but today is not that day. Our demographics for this trial were very much the standard, mostly middle-aged white males. Again, CTAC is very interested in advocating for more real-world representation in trial participants. In this case, all 135 patients were also F2 or lower, which means that their liver damage was not severe. The F scale, for those of you who are not aware, is a 4-stage scale of liver fibrosis or damage, where F0 would be a healthy liver, F2 would be a damaged but functioning liver, and F4 means nearing cirrhosis. For all HCV medications in Canada, you must have at least F2 to be eligible for treatment. Now, does that mean that one must be not too healthy and not too sick to be eligible for treatment for a curable disease? Yes, it does. You'll not be surprised to hear that CTAC is also interested in changing eligibility requirements in Canada, but that's another very long discussion for another day. Also, this trial involved the treatment naive, who are people who have never been treated for HCV before, as well as the treatment experienced, who are those who have been treated for HCV in the past, but either were not cured or who have since been reinfected. This is important to note because once one has failed a treatment, our retreatment options become limited. This is something that people really have to be conscious of as we go further into the direct-acting antiviral era. So let's look at the results of PEARL-1. Treatment-naive patients achieved a cure in 12 weeks, or SVR12. 100% of them were able to do this with ribavirin. But when the ribavirin was removed, 91% of them achieved the same result. So that's a 9% discrepancy depending on whether or not ribavirin was included. So this tells us that ribavirin still has a place in HCV treatment today. For those who were treatment experienced, ribavirin was a mandatory part of the therapy. We know that treatment experienced patients benefit from ribavirin. We've known that from several trials. So in this case, again, ribavirin allowed us to achieve 100% SVR12 for those patients on 2D. So the conclusion here is that the medication is effective, but it still requires ribavirin to be extremely effective. It also suggests that 2D was very safe, with no patients discontinuing the trial due to adverse events. So again, the PEARL-1 trial provides the majority of the data for the 2D application to the CDR. But I'd also like to quickly review 2 other studies that have not concluded but are underway and are extremely important and interesting to those of us doing work in HCV. So let's look at AGATE-1. This is a study evaluating 2D in GT4 patients who do have cirrhosis. Again, cirrhosis is liver damage and scarring that is so bad it's significantly impacting the liver's ability to function. A healthy liver is a soft liver, so scar tissue stiffens and toughens the liver, making it harder and less effective. When that's gotten to such a point that functionality reaches a very low point, then we call that cirrhosis. What really interests me here in AGATE-1 is looking at the patients who have previously failed a new DAA treatment. So you'll see specifically the treatment experienced folks in this trial are those who have failed treatments that include sofosbuvir. So sofosbuvir is a revolutionary new HCV drug that is found in Sovaldi and it's found in Harvoni. It's manufactured by Gilead. I've said earlier that when someone fails treatment with a new DAA, our retreatment options are severely limited. So it's very, very encouraging to see that this trial is looking at the population of people who have failed a new DAA. Now it's true, these new DAAs are 95%, 96% effective, so we're looking at a very, very small number of people who might have failed that treatment, or people who have been reinfected since. But still, if you're one of those people who did not achieve SVR on a new drug, you'll be extremely pleased to know that there is research being done to see what your next treatment options might be. So 2D trials have looked at that, and they've looked at it early, which is very promising. Again, the demographics of the study are pretty standard, but specifically we're looking at cirrhotics and people with liver damage. So we're looking at our harder to treat populations here. Again, very good to see in the trial stage. Also, as we've said, ribavirin is a must for those with treatment experience, and we've known that to be true for quite some time. As I've said, AGATE 1 is still ongoing. It'll be a year old come this October, but here are the arms under review. You can see that arms A, B, and C are all evaluating different lengths of treatment, so 12, 16, and 24 weeks. But what's most interesting is arm D, which is looking again at those who have HCV but have previously failed a treatment that included Ritonavir. And again, looking at 12, 16, and 24 weeks, you'll have heard, I'm sure, that most new DAAs are looking at 12-week courses of treatment. We're still looking at longer courses of treatment for these people who are particularly sick, who do have cirrhosis, who have failed, because we acknowledge that they are more difficult to treat. And the last trial I'd like to briefly look at, simply because it's very, very interesting and I think it's extremely important, is AGATE 2. This trial is very, very important because it's being conducted entirely in Egypt, where you'll recall that I've said GT4 prevalence is at least 90% of their HCV infections. So good on the investigators for getting this important trial underway in a country that desperately needs it. Again, we're looking at patients with no cirrhosis or with compensated cirrhosis. 12 and 24-week courses of therapy, 48-week follow-up. We're hoping for SVR 12. There are 160 participants. They make up both treatment naive and treatment experienced people, though no one here would have been experienced with one of the new DAAs. There would be no one here experienced with Ritonavir. And again, while SVR 4 is not something anyone is ready to declare yet, we're still reviewing the medication's efficacy after 4 weeks just to have that data. And I hope you'll share in my interest and my enthusiasm about seeing more trials evaluating that, because it really tells us how far along we've come and how quickly we're moving. Again, no one's ready to declare SVR4, but just the mere fact that almost all clinical trials are looking at that and evaluating that is very, very promising. Let's see here. Again, AGATE 2, this study is still underway. The enrollment is completed, but these are the arms involved. You'll see almost everyone is on the 12-week course, which is normal, but smaller arms are testing and reviewing efficacy over longer courses just to see if that changes anything, and because, as I've said specifically, we're looking at a population that will be difficult to treat and who's dealing with a very large burden. Let's quickly look at the safety profile of 2D. You'll see here that all adverse events or side effects have been considered very, very mild. And as far as trial participants go, there were a very small number of discontinuations. Most commonly, we're seeing some fatigue, some nausea, some insomnia, some asthenia, which is just overall weakness. You'll also see some pruritus, which is itching and rashes. Itching and rashes and skin conditions are most commonly associated with ribavirin, and they're generally considered mild and tolerable. The ribavirin dose in this medication would be weight-based to ensure that you're getting the right dose of ribavirin, because it can be associated, as I've said, with dermatological events or rashes. And again, for our HIV and HCV co-infected patients, treatment options should be discussed with your healthcare professional and very, very carefully considered. We need much more work being done in this sector on the drug interactions between direct-acting antivirals and HIV antiretroviral therapy. We need more work being done there. So now for the fun part. Now it's your turn. As I've said, we'll ask you to please complete a short survey on the webinar you participated in today. We'll ask you questions relating to your experience of HCV as a patient or a caregiver, as well as what you think about this medication and its ability to treat HCV. Now again, CTAC is one of the best providers of patient input in Canada. If it's an HIV or an HCV med, we review it and we report to the CDR. I can guarantee you that your feedback will be used in this report and it will be read when the CDR is making their decision. The only other agency in the country who provides as much feedback on HCV as we do would be the fantastic people at Hep C BC out in Victoria. Here are two very helpful links. The first one is the CDR overview explanation at the CTAC site. Again, if you look in the chat window, you'll see we also have a YouTube link to our CDR video. I really encourage you to watch that one. It's very, very informative and helps shed a lot of light on this process. And then the other link is the fantastic fact sheet on HCV developed over at CATE. If you're not familiar with CATE, they do absolutely outstanding work. I would encourage you to check out that fact sheet as well. And again, if you'd like to watch our CDR video, it's available in the chat link right there. So once more, I'd like to thank you again for your participation in this webinar. I'm delighted to take any questions you may have. Please unmute your line before asking questions. In the interim, I'm going to take a moment and put the link to the survey on the screen. Please remember to take the survey. It's an extremely important part of how drugs become accessible in Canada, and we sincerely appreciate your participation in the process. I really can't overstate how much we depend on your feedback to let these federal bodies know exactly what we think about these HCV medications and whether they have a place on our public formularies. So again, we really appreciate your participation, and it would go a very long way to have you all participate in the survey data accumulation as well. So I'll be putting up that link right now. If anyone has any questions, please let me know.